When I hear various stories from people who have had strange experiences, I feel like there's a bias in the places where they've had them. It may seem obvious, but people often have scary experiences in places like hospitals and tunnels, as well as in abandoned houses and villages. Of course, that doesn't guarantee that you'll experience something paranormal in those places. Abandoned buildings with its crumbling walls and dark, empty interior brings forth feelings of fear and thoughts of death and ghosts. These emotions could lead one to believe that they heard or saw something paranormal. The next common place people talk about are mountains. I've heard countless stories about strange things occurring deep in the mountains. Again, there are pockets of darkness within them where light barely reaches even during the day. Being surrounded by trees in every direction and the sounds of animals and shifting shadows could lead one to believe they saw a ghost. Today, I want to share a story about 4 university students who went into the mountains to check out a famous haunted spot. The mountain is well known for hiking, however, several hikers go missing each year. There's a rumor that if you visit it late at night, you'd hear a voice saying, "Hey, I'm here," from somewhere deep in the trees. I actually didn't want to go, but I was the only one that had a driver's license, so I had no choice, said Fumiya. I've always been afraid of paranormal things. I don't even watch scary movies. But there was a part of me that was embarrassed to tell my friends that I was scared, so that was another reason why I agreed to go. Fumiya borrowed his father's car and they left at 1 a.m. They had to drive up a winding mountainous road with streetlights far and wide in between. The car was small and old and barely had enough horsepower to go up the steep road even though he was fully pressing down on the accelerator. It probably didn't help that 4 males were sitting inside. The time it took from one street light to the next seemed to be quite long because of how slow the car was moving. Fumiya put on some upbeat music to hide how nervous and scared he was, but one of the other guys said, "Turn off the music. Let's tell some scary stories instead since we're on our way to a haunted spot." Hearing him say that, Fumiya wanted to turn the car right around and drive back home, but he didn't want to be the one to break everyone's mood. So he tried to think of other things and did his best not to listen to the stories that were being told. After a while, they finally arrived at their destination. There was a parking lot with just a single old lamp casting a dull circle of light. Seemed like this sufficiently creeped everyone out, and someone suggested that they drive all the way to the trailhead instead of parking here and having to walk that extra distance. Fumiya drove out onto the single road leading out of the lot and towards the trailhead. It was unpaved and the gravel hit the car, making clanking sounds as they slowly drove along it. It was a very bumpy ride, with large rocks scattered throughout and made Fumiya worried that it might damage the underside of his dad's car. The path kept getting narrower until it was just wide enough for one car to drive through, and then came to a stop when they couldn't proceed any further. The first thing they noticed when the engine turned off was the silence. There wasn't a single sound. No rustling of the leaves, no crickets or other insects, no nothing. All the boys were from the city, so they were surprised at how quiet it was up there. One of them had brought a powerful LED flashlight with him. He turned it on and cast the light around, but the silence still remained deafening. It almost felt visceral. Fumiya was freaking out so bad by this time and wanted to go home. He definitely didn't want to walk into that mountain, so he said, I think I'll wait for you guys in the car." "What? Why?" the rest of them asked. "Well, 'cause I'd have to move the car if anyone comes up." "Don't be ridiculous. There's no way another car's going to come up here at this time of night. Are you being a pussy?" Another friend came to Fumiya's rescue and said, "Well, actually, I think it's going to be scarier to be alone in the car by himself." He had a point there, but Fumiya was willing to take that risk rather than moving a single step forward. The darkness swallowed the 3 up in no time as they walked off, even though the headlights of the car were illuminating them. Fumiya turned all the interior lights on, turned on the music, and made sure the doors were locked. He took out his phone to watch some comedy shows but saw that his phone didn't have any reception. That alone made him feel extremely lonely, and he wished his friends would hurry and come back. He sat inside for what seemed like ages, but when he looked at the time, only a few short minutes had passed since the group separated. People say that time seems to go by slower when you're freaked out, and Fumiya felt extremely uneasy about the fact that he was all alone. He looked out the window from time to time, trying to see if he could see his friends coming back, but there was zero movement beyond the headlights. It was during one of these checks when he thought he saw something move in the darkness in front of him. His heart began beating even harder. Maybe it was nothing. His mind was probably playing tricks on him, but he needed to make sure, so he swallowed his fear and squinted his eyes to see who or what it was. There was someone definitely standing in the shadows. Feeling relieved that his friends were finally making their way back, Fumiya let out a big sigh of relief. He waited for them to enter the beam of light, and sure enough, the shadow continued to move forward and finally stepped into it. But the person who came into view weren't his three friends. Rather, it was a middle-aged man. Shit, maybe he came to warn me about the loud music, thought Fumiya, and he quickly shut it off. The man continued walking towards the car and finally stopped outside the driver's side window. Fumiya opened it an inch and apologized to him about the noise. The man furrowed his eyebrows, patted his lips, and said, "You shouldn't be parked here at this time of night. There might be other people and cars coming, and you're in the way." Fumiya couldn't argue. Even though he was being admonished, he was happy to talk to someone. He felt like he'd been rescued from the fear that was becoming a bit too overbearing. Fumiya replied, "I'm sorry, I'll move the car down to the parking lot now." "What are you doing here anyway?" asked the older man. "Oh, my friends went into the mountain." "You're not allowed to go in there at this time of night." "I'm sorry, I think they'll be back real soon, maybe in 10 minutes or so." "I see. You can come back in 10 minutes, but wait in the parking lot until then," said the man, and he walked away. Fumiya slowly reversed back down the narrow, unpaved road and parked in the parking lot. After about 10 minutes, he drove back up to where he was waiting before, but his friends still weren't back. "What's taking them so long?" wondered Fumiya. He was starting to get worried that something might have happened to them when he saw a man approaching the car again. He began rolling down the windows to talk to the man when he stopped short. It wasn't the same man that had approached him a while ago. It was definitely strange to see multiple people up in these mountains in the middle of the night. This man looked younger than the previous guy. He had a green backpack on and looked like a hiker. Considering this mountain was famous for its treks, Fumiya figured he was coming back from a hike. That's what he tried to convince himself anyway. Just as he was about to call out to the man to tell him he was just waiting for his friends to come back, the man spoke up first. "Hey, excuse me." "Oh, I apologize. I'll be out of here real soon. I'm just waiting for my friends to come back," said Fumiya. "Oh, that's all right. I wanted to ask you a question. I'm dead, aren't I?" "Huh?" What this man asked made no sense at all. Fumiya replied, "No, of course not. You're alive." The man didn't seem convinced as he cocked his neck to the side and said, "Well, I just saw my own body laying near the stream, so I think I died. And if that's the case, I really regret fighting with my family." After saying those words, he walked back into the mountain and disappeared. As if they just walked past each other, one of Fumiya's friends came running over to the car. "What took you so long? A man just came There's no time for that. We need to go to a place where we can get reception. Hurry!" Fumiya felt a bit irritated that he got cut off mid-sentence, but upon seeing how flustered his friend looked, he did as he was told. He reversed out of the path once again and drove down the mountain as quickly as he could until they had reception again. The friend wasted no time making a call. "Hello? Is this the police? We're at so-and-so mountain. We just found a man by the stream and he doesn't seem to be breathing." After he got off the phone, Fumiya asked him what had happened. Apparently, they had walked up the trek for a few minutes when they heard the sound of water running not so far off. They shone their flashlight in the direction when they saw a green backpack not far off. They walked closer to it when they saw a man lying on the ground. The description seemed to match the younger man Fumiya had seen just a few minutes ago. There was no doubt they were one and the same. "I'm dead, aren't I?" The man's question echoed in Fumiya's ears. A few days later, they were contacted by the police. Apparently, the man had gone missing while hiking in that mountain, and his family had filed a missing persons report a few days earlier. They believed the man had slipped and fallen somewhere higher up the trek and had lost his energy further downstream. The man's family wanted to thank the boys, and the boys also wanted to go pay their respects, so they went to the man's house. The photograph in the frame above the altar was the same as the man who'd talked to Fumiya. He told the family what the man had said to him about how he wished he hadn't got into a fight with them, and the following is what his family said. The man loved to hike, and he used to go by himself all the time. Recently, however, he was often coming home with various injuries, and there were a few times he even had to be rescued out because he had become incapacitated. His family had told him to slow down with the hiking because he was starting to cause problems not just for himself, but to others. He didn't listen though. He held his ground, got into an argument with them, and against their wishes, went hiking again by himself. And that was the last time they saw him. A few days after that, we went back to the mountain during the day to burn some incense in the spot where the man was found. This time, the boys had parked in the parking lot and walked up the path, so Fumiya noticed something on one of the trees that he didn't notice the other night. There was a nylon bag hanging from it. When he looked inside, there was an old piece of paper that read, "We're looking for this man." Fumiya remembered how several people go missing every single year as he continued to read what was written. There was a name of a man, his height, a description of his physical frame, and the clothes he was wearing at the time. The man loved the mountains and had apparently been saying how much he wanted to live in one. Finally, there was a picture of the man, and Fumiya instantly felt chills. It was the same man that had approached the car first that night. He had apparently been missing for 7 years. I work at a factory and was on night shift last week. In a factory, there's so much noise from machines that you can't hear people talking unless they're really close. I was working as usual when I suddenly heard someone walking in heels right behind me. I turned around but couldn't see anyone. I finished my shift at 5 a.m. and made my way to the parking lot to go home when I saw a woman in a bright red dress and a big red hat standing at the exit of the parking lot. The sun was already rising, so it was quite light out already, and I could see her as clear as day. The more I thought about it, the stranger it seemed. The factory was located in the countryside, and who would be standing there in that kind of getup at the break of dawn? So the next day, I went around asking whether anyone else witnessed the same woman, but none of them had. I figured my eyes were playing tricks on me, having worked all through the night. That night at work, I heard the sound of someone walking in heels again, but could never see anyone when I turned around. I must be really tired, I thought to myself. When I walked into the parking lot in the morning, the woman in red wasn't there, and I felt relieved. I was driving back home when I saw her. She was standing next to a rice field wearing the exact same dress and hat. I couldn't see much of her face other than her mouth, and it looked like she was slightly smiling. First off, I'd only seen old men and women who were farmers living around the area. I was definitely starting to feel a bit scared, but did my best to convince myself that I was seeing things because of a lack of sleep. Third day on the night shift, I heard those heels clanking again, and again, nobody there. I began to feel annoyed more than anything and muttered under my breath, "What the hell?" Just then, I heard those heels start running, and at tremendous speed. The creepiness had reached climax. I vowed to call in sick to work the following day and went home. The woman wasn't in the parking lot, and she wasn't standing by the rice field either. But there she was, standing on a small bridge about 5 or 6 kilometers from my house. Again, I could only see her mouth, and she was grinning and facing me. I continued to look at her from my rearview mirror, and she did the same. She had turned her body so that she was facing my direction. She was clearly getting closer to my house. At this pace, it wouldn't be long until she discovered where I lived. When I got home, I talked to my mum, who's got a bit of the third eye, straight away. She said, "You might be in trouble. This is pretty serious. What did you do?" I said, "I didn't do anything. I have no idea who she is." "I don't know where you picked her up, but this is serious, so I'm taking you to a temple where my friend's working. We're leaving now." It wasn't a short trip as the temple was 3 hours away. Before we left, I heard her talking to my dad on the phone. It was obvious that she was crying and her voice was trembling. Now, my mom is a very strong woman, and I'd never seen her cry until this moment. Even when she got into fights with my dad, it was my dad who got kicked out of the house. I also heard her say, "I'm so sorry. Worst case scenario, I'm going to take his place." What the hell was she going on about? Was I going to die? What did she mean she would take my place? It sounded really dangerous. I asked her all these questions in the car ride, but she just told me to shut up and stay quiet. I was exhausted and sleepy because I worked through the night, so my mom drove all the way. And then I saw her. The woman was standing about 5 minutes away from home. Since I wasn't driving, I saw her face clearly for the first time. She was still wearing the same red dress and hat. Judging from her outfit, I thought she'd be young, but she actually looked like she was in her 60s. Her eyes were wide open and bloodshot, her eyebrows were furrowed, and she was staring at me with so much hatred. But her mouth still had that same smile. I was terrified and all my muscles tensed up. I let out a small yelp and my mum yelled out, "Don't look! Keep your head down now!" I jumped when my mum suddenly yelled. I did as I was told, looked down and shut my eyes tight. That's when I heard it. It was right in my ear. I again let out a yelp. My mum said, "Don't look and don't listen. Shut your eyes and muffle your ears." And she turned up the radio volume to its max. I must have fallen asleep from the culmination of fear and fatigue, and I had a dream. In it, I was standing in a clearing in a forest. The woman was standing deeper in the trees and saying, "Look at me, look at me." I was so scared and was trying to run away from her, but she would always be a few steps ahead, telling me to look at her. When she was right in front of my face, my mum woke me up. When I came to, I felt extremely uncomfortable. I had wet myself. My face was also wet with tears and snot. I didn't have any change of clothes, and even though it was summer, I was shivering. I didn't have enough strength to walk, so my mum helped me walk towards the temple. A monk came out to greet us, and he wasted no time bombarding me with questions. "Where did you pick it up? Since when? And what did you do?" I briefly explained to him about how the woman had been slowly getting closer to our house from my job site. The monk asked me where the factory was located and where I saw the woman last, so I told him. I told him exactly where I worked and how I'd seen her about 5 minutes from our home on our way to the temple that morning. The monk ran off into the main hall without a word. My mom and I stood there, me feeling like I was about to collapse at any moment, when a different monk came out and told us to follow him. he helped my mum carry me in. He sat me in front of a huge Buddhist altar. There were several monks sitting in a circle around me, and they began to chant a prayer. That prayer seemed to get louder and more powerful as time went on, and then I was hit with sudden drowsiness. Just as I was about to pass out into deep sleep, I heard someone whisper in my ear, "I found you." It jolted me awake and my eyes shot open, and at that exact moment, I was hit on my shoulder with those big wooden sticks that monks use when they're going through training, and then I completely blacked out. When I regained consciousness, there was a big puddle around me. Seems I had pissed myself again, and I was still crying. Although I was originally sitting on a cushion in the center of the room, I was now in the corner and sleeping on my side. I tried to get up, but my entire body was aching and it felt so heavy that I needed help to move back to the center of the room. It wasn't done yet. The monks poured sake over my head, and this time, only one of them began to chant some kind of mantra. I didn't pass out this time, and as the seconds ticked by, my body began to feel a bit lighter. When it was over, I still didn't have enough strength to walk by myself, but I certainly felt better than before. A couple of monks helped me get showered, and when I emerged from the room, my mum ran over crying and saying she was so glad that I was okay. This is what the monk told me. It was a bit long, so I'll give you the gist of it. The woman I saw was a kind of Grim Reaper in the region where the factory is located. She's said to usually appear during a certain festival in July, and if she ever appeared before that, it was usually to take someone's soul in exchange for bringing a dead one back to Earth. And this occurred because someone somewhere had performed a ritual to resurrect the dead. This time around, I had become her target. Because my mum was a local, she knew all about this, and she was willing to sacrifice herself if the time ever came where the woman finally came for me. The place where this god is enshrined is on the top of a mountain behind the factory and is off limits. The monk said there's nothing good that can come out of praying to her. I couldn't move my body for several days, so I spent a week at the temple. I'm home now, but I can't walk without a cane, and I can't even hold chopsticks properly. My mum called my workplace on my behalf and explained the situation. They were nice enough to give me paid leave for a while to recuperate. I really wish I could say this was a joke, but I'm 100% serious. I can't forget what that woman looked like, and I'm scared like hell. I keep the amulet that the monk gave me on my person at all times. Oh, one last thing. I haven't been given the all clear yet. The monk told me that if my body didn't heal by the Obon festival in August, that I wouldn't make it. Have you ever been to a flea market? It's a great way to allow ordinary people like me to easily sell unwanted items for a bit of extra cash. Most of the time, people ask for all kinds of discounts, so it's not as lucrative as some of those second-hand online selling platforms. But there are definitely some benefits to doing it this way. The main thing is that you don't have to worry about shipping costs. People will come around and buy what they want, and you don't have to go through the hassle of packaging it up and sending it out from the post office. I honestly wouldn't mind giving some of the stuff away for free because they'll just be thrown out as trash, but it's my rule to at least try to cover for the cost of having a stall and maybe my lunch or dinner for that day. I decided to take a short break when I had sold a good chunk of what I'd brought that day. I took a walk around the market, feeling a little excited and wondering what kind of bargains I might find. While there were many sellers like me who came to get rid of their clothes, there were also handmade accessories and small interior items for sale, so it was fun just to look around. It was at one of these stalls that a stuffed toy caught my attention. It was Chopper from the popular anime series One Piece. It was extremely clean, no blemishes or stains on it, and it wasn't even misshapen at all. I wondered if it was brand new. When I saw that it was only 500 yen, I quickly took out some change and asked the woman at the stall whether I could buy it. The woman had been turned away the whole time, so I didn't notice, but when she turned around, she was so thin that her cheekbones were jutting out, and her eyes looked like they were about to pop out of the sockets at any moment. I didn't let the shock show on my face, but I wondered if she might be sick. Maybe she was a yandere or something. Anyway, she reached out her arm, which was just skin and bones, looked at the price tag, and asked me for the money. Her voice sounded like that of a dying mosquito. I quickly handed over 500 yen, gave a quick bow and a thank you, and left the scene. I turned around when I was some distance away, but the woman was still staring at me. She seemed like a strange individual, but I was really happy to get what looked to be a brand new stuffed toy of Chopper. I headed straight to my van, put Chopper inside, and grabbed more of my old clothes to put in the stall. A few hours later, I'd managed to sell about 70% of what I came with. I don't think I've ever been able to sell everything. Leftover items mostly had some kind of sentimental value, and I refused to lower the prices on them, so too bad for me, I guess. That night, I decided to go grab some pizza for dinner with the cash I made earlier that day. I was walking back to my apartment while looking at the menu on my phone when I remembered I'd left Chopper in the car. I went to go get it, and when I opened the car door, I felt someone staring at me. I turned around, but no one was there. It was already dark by this time, so if someone had been standing in the shadows, I probably would have missed them. I took Chopper up to my room, ordered pizza, took a bath, and got ready for bed. When I turned off the lights, I still couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, so I peeked out the window. I thought I saw something move in the shadow, but I couldn't be sure. I observed the area for a couple of minutes, but nothing happened, so I decided to go to bed. That feeling didn't go away for the next several days. I sometimes felt like I was being observed even when I was at work, but the feeling was the strongest when I got home in the evening. I could feel the stares boring a hole into my back. One day I was lying down on the lounge just chilling when I accidentally kicked Chopper off the lounge. It went rolling until it eventually hit the wall. I went to go get it and was patting its head when I realized that something didn't feel right. I was certain I felt something hard when my foot made contact with it. I pressed down on Chopper from all angles, and when I folded his hat in half, I felt it. There was something hard and rectangular inside. I felt around it, and it seemed to be the size of a ring box. I didn't want to mutilate Chopper, so I took a pair of scissors and slowly began cutting the seams. I wasn't used to doing such fiddly work, so it took me a whole 10 minutes to open up the hat. I peeled it open, and buried deep inside the stuffing was a ring box. I took it out and set it on the table. This was strange indeed. Who would go through the trouble of putting something like that inside of a stuffed toy? I looked at all the seams, and although it was done really well, I could tell that there was a difference between the stitches around the hat and the rest of Chopper's body. Did that weird skinny woman do this? There was no point trying to figure that out. I took the box and opened the lid. I froze and almost threw it to the ground, but thank God I didn't, because the contents would have spilled out and there is no way in hell I wanted to touch any of it. It was packed with a bunch of fingernails and hair. The cotton cloth that was lining the bottom had a dark stain on it and looked like it was dried up blood. I was freaking out when I suddenly felt it again. Someone was watching me. I snapped the ring box shut, put it away, and turned the lights off. I crept to my window and peeked out through the gap in the curtains. Of all the days I checked out my window, that day just had to be the one where I saw someone lurking outside and looking up at my unit. My throat instantly constricted and I felt like coughing from the sudden sensation. I did my best to stay calm and studied the dark shadow to see whether I could gather any details. I couldn't help but think that it looked like that woman from the flea market. How the hell did she find out where I lived? I looked back at the ring box. I really didn't want to do it, but I had to. I got some old newspapers, laid it out on the floor, and proceeded to dump out the contents. After all the hair and nails fell out, the cotton cloth remained, and when I peeled it off the bottom, there it was, a small black piece of plastic. It was a GPS chip. That woman had put in a tiny GPS along with her nails, hair, and blood into that ring box, stuffed it inside Chopper, and sold it for 500 yen. My hairs were standing on end. I didn't want it anywhere close to me, so I dumped it all in the bin. I had to wait until daylight to throw it out to make sure that psycho woman wasn't there. In Japan, you can only throw out the bin on certain days. Unfortunately, the garbage collector wasn't coming to my area for another 3 days, so I drove a few blocks and threw it out in a different neighborhood. I was sad to see Chopper go. None of this was his fault, but there was no way I could stitch him back up and keep him. I stayed at different hotels since that night, and a couple of weeks later moved into a new apartment. The feeling of being observed disappeared when I moved out, so thankfully that was the one and only GPS. I don't know what the woman's intentions were, but I'm glad it didn't escalate into something else. I learned the hard way that buying things secondhand comes with certain risks. I still purchase used things through online apps and Amazon, but now I double check everything when I receive them, and I recommend you to do the same.